So welcome to this brand marketing webinar. My name is Neil Wilkins and I'll be taking you through some ideas and things to be thinking about when it comes to the concept of using brand in all its various guises within your organization. And I guess when we start to think about brand, what we are typically looking at, and I guess the starting point for many people in organizations, is thinking about the visual representation of their brand. And often when we think of some sort of big brands, big organizations who use their brand very much as the sort of the key footprint, both in the real world and digitally, we often think of their logo, of that kind of physical manifestation of almost like a stamp, if you like, or a mark that really sort of evokes everything about them. Obviously, big examples are Nike, Apple, Audi, and there are many sort of versions of this as we go through the concept of brand. But for me, we need to kind of sort of start by looking at a sort of a more kind of sort of fundamental level as to kind of what a brand is. And there are many different definitions of brand. And often when we start to think about this, it's really important to get our own sort of context or our own view of it. The American Marketing Association has a very clear, as an example, very clear definition of a brand that really starts us to think about how our products and services are interwoven together to offer something to customers. But for me, that kind of, it's okay, but it's really only a starting point in this whole consideration of the power of a brand. I much prefer something that's a little bit more evocative, as I'll explain in a moment. Certainly from a traditional perspective, Kotler and Keller, who are sort of very much advocates of the use of brand within the broader kind of marketing sphere, see branding, which is the verb for a brand, branding as being endowing products and services with the power of a brand. In other words, actually seeing a brand as something that sits almost as an umbrella above the concept of delivering value and delivering products and services. So it's almost this umbrella sort of positioning, if you like, which to me is becoming a little bit closer to what we might sort of, I guess, value and benefit from when we start thinking about brand. But for me, that's still not quite enough. I want a little bit more really from a definition. When we look into the advertising and communications world, an example here from Leo Burnett, which is that a brand is anything that leaves a mental picture of identity. And this for me is getting closer and closer and closer to something of the power of a brand. Now, a brand is anything that leaves a mental picture of identity. And I think there's two kind of concepts running hand in hand here. This idea of having an identity, so something that's this sort of cohesive bond of stuff that kind of comes together in this thing that we call a brand. And really importantly, this mental picture, in other words, it leaves this kind of indelible footprint, if you like, for anybody who encounters this thing. So there's an identity, which again shows and thinks about sort of cohesion of messages, of stories, of how this conversation plays out, and then leaving some kind of mental picture. So for me, this is getting a little bit closer as to what a brand potentially could be. So I've been playing around with this and I've come up with my own sort of definition, if you like, of a brand is the feeling that you're left with when you remove everything else. Because I think a lot of people think of brand as being, oh, it's the product, or oh, it's the service, or oh, it's the logo, oh, it's the color scheme, oh, it's the font that's used when they communicate. And as we'll see as we go through lots of examples in a moment, yes, all of those things apply, but the real power of a brand is if you were to strip all of those things out, what is it that you're left with? So for me, it's that sort of inherent quality behind the entity of that organization or that group of people or that collection of stuff So yes, it is that mental picture of identity. Yes, it is endowing products and service with a collective sort of view, if you like, of what they bring to the world. And yes, it is. It's features and its benefits and it's all of that stuff woven together. But to me, it's much more intrinsic than that. Is this feeling that you're left with when you remove everything else. So a brand to me is something that if you took all the products away, it would still be an entity that's still there. If you took all of the service away, if you took all of the marketing away, if you took all of the sort of sales and communication away, it would still have a presence. It would still be something that would leave a feeling with the people as they kind of moved through it, the experience of it, moved on to their daily lives. So to me, the most significant brands on the planet are the ones that leave you with a feeling. Now, this could be a positive feeling, it could be a challenging feeling, it could be even a negative feeling, but they leave you with a feeling. And to me, that is the power of an effective brand. So how does this play out? Well, we're seeing a whole range of different impacts, if you like, of branding and actually how a brand is used within an organization. And so to me, this is a really important way of how we can start to think about brand and actually use it. And for me, this takes it way beyond just that kind of visual identity, which is often in there. I mean, it's still an important component part, but it is just one of a whole range of different ways that we can use branding when we think of our own organizations and when we start to sort of use, you know, the concept of brand in everything that we do. So for me, taking each one of these things literally one by one, we can start to explore the starting point of how best value can be created through the brand that we have. Now, of course, if you are already leaving your customers, your stakeholders, your buyers, you know, anybody associated with your organization, if you're already leaving them with some kind of feeling after the engagement that they have with you, then you have a brand. Now you might say, well, okay, it's not a big brand like the Nikes and McDonald's of this world, but if you're leaving a feeling, if you're leaving some kind of impact with what you do, then you have a brand. And you can also say that this is at a very kind of local level, you know, individuals in your organization, and even you yourself possibly have a brand. Because if you're leaving an impact, if you're leaving people with a feeling after they engage with you, then that in itself you could define as being a brand. So what we're looking at here are a range of different opportunities. So these can be, as we've said, visual identity, tone of voice, that kind of thing. But we can also use this in terms of experience. So this is workplace experience. So, you know, building a culture, building a management style, building a way that you communicate internally. That is very inherent in the whole brand position. We can use it externally in terms of packaging, in terms of how we design and develop products and services, how we create portfolios. We can use it in terms of how we interact and engage with our stakeholders, and this could be through our supply chain, it could be through our distribution chain, it could be obviously with customers. So there's a whole host of things going on here. And what I always sort of like to do is start to think about how our brand both can be used as well as is used currently, because there could be some competitive opportunities, there could be some development opportunities if you can really sort of think deeply about the opportunity that you have for focusing in on some of these things at the same time as actually assessing and surveying actually how you're doing right now versus the competition. Because if there's an opportunity maybe in your sector for your organization to really take stakeholder expectation, just use that one as an example, and then actually think about our brand, how do we interact and how do we deliver service and value to our stakeholders based on their expectations using our brand versus how the competition does it. And you could also then say tone of voice. How is our brand and its tone of voice within our market sector versus the competition? So this is a really nice way potentially of actually viewing the context of your brand. So not just saying, hey, we've got a lovely logo, hey, we're really, really tight, look at our website, look at all our social media, aren't we great? This is about looking at a more granular level, a bit more detailed level about actually how we use brand through a whole range of different impacts that it might make. So let's look at these one by one, and let's just explore in here if there's an opportunity for you to maybe sort of delve more deeply into some of these concepts and actually figure out whether they are really valuable to you. So let's take the first one, purpose and values. So this obviously is an inherent part of your brand. Your brand obviously has, core values that it delivers, values to the stakeholders, community, planet, throughout the marketing mix that you're focusing on. So it's about thinking about those values and thinking, okay, is our brand appropriately positioned? Are we actually sharing those values appropriately through the brand stories that we tell? Do we have a higher purpose? And are we putting that higher purpose at the core of the way that we position our brand? A nice example is Patagonia. And Patagonia, in terms of their branding, puts core purpose right at the heart and right at the center of it. And that almost then sort of positions all of the products and services that it offers at the next level down. So it uses brand positioning as the main sort of storyteller, if you like, of its core purpose. So that is an organization, a really great example from my mind, that actually puts core purpose and values right at the heart of its brand position. Now, of course, that in itself attracts a certain type of customer, a certain type of supply chain and stakeholder network. And in many ways, that can also be used obviously as a filter for attracting more like-minded customers and engagement of a similar type of nature. So it allows the organization to use brand really strategically to position itself in its world in a really appropriate way that recognizes its own core purpose and values in themselves. So purpose and values can be used as part of your brand story at a really strategic level that obviously operates and sort of filters down to a tactical level as well. So on a day-to-day basis, we see that played out in all of the communications that it does, both internally and obviously externally from a customer perspective. Another one I find that's really sort of quite interesting is when we think about market positioning. So if you think about your brand and how it's positioned in your marketplace, what kind of positioning does your brand have? I mean, I always sort of like to talk about the example of Virgin, which has obviously a whole sort of disparate range of different sort of brand or sub-brands, if you like, underneath the core Virgin corporate brand in a whole range of different sectors. And in many ways, Virgin uses a very similar style of brand positioning when it enters new markets. You'll never see, and I've never seen, an example of Virgin being a market leader and actually creating a new sector, if you like. The way that Virgin positions its brand in all sectors that it enters is that it will come in maybe as a number two, maybe as a follower or as a niche player with a special, very specific offering, and it comes in at that kind of sort of tactical level and then grows the brand using all of the Virgin values to then become a dominant player. So it uses its brand position in a really kind of both tactical and strategic way, in a very clever way, allowing other organizations and other brands to almost test out markets before then it comes in and produces all of its brand values to then steal market share. So it's a really, really almost cunning way of using a very well-known brand, but in a way that kind of protects itself. So it doesn't stand all of the risk of creating new markets. It lets others do that and then comes in and adds value off the back of that and then creates new market opportunities. So maybe that's something that could apply to your organization if you're looking to break into new markets. Maybe there are certain brand values that you have as an organization that can position your market or position a new market for your brand in quite a sort of a clever and sort of tactical way. And of course, this in itself can open up new market opportunities. So it's about thinking quite creatively about the market position that you currently have, but also then opportunities in breaking into new markets if those are appropriate. Another way that we can use brand is to figure out what our stakeholder expectations are and then play those expectations back using our branding as a really kind of key strategic tool. One example which has been using this kind of approach for many decades is M&S. The British retailer, obviously, that's very, very well established, almost legendary positioning in its core markets. Over the years, more recently, probably the last sort of 10 years or so, M&S has not been without its problems. Certainly some of its sort of core markets have been really threatened with newcomers into some of its sort of strongholds, and certainly the clothing area, of which over the years M&S has been strongly identified with, has obviously been under threat, but it's been able to ride out some of those sort of short-term real challenges by really aligning itself again and consistently revisiting the stakeholder expectations, the expectations of the people and organizations around it in its kind of community, where there are certain levels of quality, levels of service, and certain expectations that M&S is renowned for. And it plays back, reinforcing consistently, time and time again, those core values. So it aligns itself and its brand with these stakeholder expectations, and that's been really important to protect itself and to protect its revenues and to protect its long-term future in the eyes of both the stock market, but also in terms of its customer. And of course, in really dynamic marketplaces, and certainly high street retail is one of those most dynamic places, which is really under threat with online retailing and the growth in that area. It's been something that's been really under pressure. But M&S has managed to ride out those consistent storms by really using its brand to meet those expectations of its broader stakeholders. So what can we learn from this? Well, it's very much about sort of constantly being mindful to the expectations that our wider community has. And as marketers, this isn't just about dealing to customer needs. This is about looking at society as a whole. This is looking at our communities. This is looking at the relationships we have in our supply chains and distribution networks. All of this kind of stuff, using maybe the M&S example here as a really good practice of why that is so important, particularly in really challenging times. Another way we can use our brand, and this is probably one that is the most familiar one to many of us, is the visual identity. Now, probably one of the real world leaders in this is Nike. Anybody who sees the Nike brand, both on clothing, on sponsorship, on television, online, wherever we see this brand, it's got such a strong visual identity that we don't almost now need to hear any more about it to actually have already formed an opinion around that brand. So this is what I'm talking about with this whole thing about it's the feeling that's left when you take everything else away. So we don't need to know about the sponsored athletes. We don't need to see the latest trainer range. We just know that this brand stands for certain things and it brings certain values to the world. So this is the power of visual identity, and it's as crucial for you if you're in business to business as if you're in business to consumer. It doesn't matter what your product or service is. If you can create a visual identity that relays back and retells a story at the simplistic level of either a strapline or even just something your equivalent of the Nike swoosh, then you're on the right roads to maintaining this kind of consistent position in the eyes of the world. So the visual identity thing is obviously super important, and it is often the starting point when we look at branding stories and we look at how branding is actually used. Often this is the starting point, but as we're already seeing, there's so many more other things in this. But as the overall kind of overarching umbrella, if you like, to this brand positioning, certainly visual identity is really strong. So we need to make sure that that is a consistent thing that we tell on a consistent basis. And when it comes into that whole visual identity, one of the next things that we often see is the tone of voice of an organization. Now, no matter whether you like a brand, or whether you identify with a brand or not, the tone of voice has to be consistent. The most effective brands in every sector are the ones who just have a consistent tone of voice. Whether they resonate with you or I or not is irrelevant, as long as they have a consistent tone of voice for their target audience, and that's both their customers, but also their suppliers and their other stakeholders, then they are on the road to success. For me, a really interesting example is something like Paddy Power. Now, whether or not you are target audience, whether or not you identify with them as a brand, there's a really, really strong consistency in tone of voice. And we see that playing out whenever we see their advertising, whenever we see them on the high street, whenever we see them in digital or social media. There's a real consistency of tone of voice. Now, it may resonate with you or it may not. And in many ways, that's kind of irrelevant. It's about the consistency of tone of voice. So by really understanding what's in it for the customer, what's in it for their experience, and really understanding them as a persona, that's your starting point. So think about the tone of voice that you're conveying at the moment and the tone of voice that would be most appropriate for your target persona, the most important one, particularly through these challenging times when, you know, noise, particularly digitally, is going to increase at an increasing rate. We need to be cutting through with a tone of voice that's both consistent but also highly relevant to the people that we're targeting. So that is a fundamental building block in this whole branding piece. And of course, that plays on as well into the broader kind of marketing communications. And when I talk about broad marketing communications, I'm talking all the way through the customer's journey. So that can be traditional marketing and traditional communication, so offline stuff, as well as obviously the whole plethora of things that we do online. So when we have this visual identity, we've got a consistent tone of voice that we've decided and collectively agreed as a brand that we're going to be sharing, and that we're going to consistently talk in that same tone of voice, then it's all about putting your marketing communications consistently and joined up and integrated. And that word integration is really key when it comes to effective branding, and particularly online, where people are seeing your brand and your messages and your tone of voice and your communications through a whole range of different channels and tools. So a really, really nice example that I like is Riverford, the organic home delivery service of organic sort of fruit and veg and other products. I really like their marketing communications, which has a really, really nice joined up feel. So visually, it's all the same. You know, the fonts, the branding, the tone of voice is all really, really consistent. And one of the really nice things that they use in their marketing communications, and again, this can apply to all of us to some or to a greater or lesser extent, depending on our target persona, what they do is they story tell, and they story tell from the farming upwards. In other words, what they do is they take you right back to the core of the product. Now, of course, in this particular instance, the core of the product is the piece of vegetable or the fruit that's actually growing on the tree or in the field. And they take you back to the story of that particular item growing. So if, for example, as we've had recently, we've had a lot of rain in Britain, we've had a lot of sort of wet sort of fields, and products have either benefited or deteriorated as a result of that. So what Riverford do is they explain to you in real terms what's been going on out in the fields and how that's reflected in the product availability in the box that's delivered to your door. And it's not just from a corporate standpoint, they actually do it with the tone of voice and the narrative of the farmer in the field telling you the story. And so that marketing communication is just a beautiful transition all the way through from, you know, literally grassroots, to being sort of sat there with you, getting a really clear understanding through that branding, through that positioning of actually what's going on and why a certain product was available and why a certain product was replaced with another. So you get to feel part of it. Remember I said at the start of this, branding is how you feel after everything else is taken away. So if you took away all the products and services, you still feel part of this whole Riverford farm experience, because you start to get an understanding of the reasons why, you get an understanding of the authenticity of the brand and kind of what's going on behind the scenes. So it's really authentic storytelling. And to me, lovely example of how you can kind of put branding at the core of everything that you do. Now, of course, another way that you can use that is to be thinking not only of the end customer, but also in terms of the other partnerships that you have around you. It's very unlikely that as a brand, as a business, that you're operating in isolation. You know, most organizations actually work with third parties. So I'm going to use the word partner in its very broadest sense. So when we think about partnerships, we're thinking about any other organization or person or third party who can actually help you to deliver this consistency of offer. I was thinking about what example I'd give sort of in this webinar around this whole thing of partnerships, and one that I thought would be really interesting to talk about was Cisco. Now, Cisco operates in the telecoms and digital communications arena in a broad range of different kind of sort of tech platform and enabling of technologies sort of positions. That's kind of its role. So yes, it produces hard product. It creates platforms, but what it does, I would say arguably at least as well, if not better than most organizations in its sector, is it takes, as part of its core branding, it takes partnerships really seriously. It knows that in its ecosystem, it cannot do it in isolation. So what it uses is its brand position to create a real trusted partners network. So it actually sits at the core of its ecosystem, understanding the tone of voice, the visual identity, all the stuff that we've been talking about. But it uses all of that to consistently gain partnerships who can obviously help Cisco themselves to grow and evolve as a business. So it uses like-minded organizations to partner with, and often, and this is the really interesting choice of using Cisco here, often these organizations are also competitors. So what it does is it figures out how can we partner with our competitors to create an ecosystem and a community and a marketplace that is greater than us individually. So it uses the concept of partnership and its branding in a really kind of innovative way to both grow the marketplace, but also to protect itself into the future. So it becomes a really, really important inherent part of the ecosystem that it operates in. So for all of us, we can learn from this. So often sort of not necessarily just looking at competitors as competitors, but thinking, okay, are there certain things that they do that if we were to partner, it would provide more value to the customer, more value to all of our stakeholders, and actually would grow us as a business as well. So I really like that as an example. That's a really well proven way that we can use branding in a really careful, strategic way to boost our organization, but also provide greater value for everyone. And I guess kind of spinning on from that, the next point in the journey of exploring branding is how it can impact on our product portfolios and the choice of kind of products that we go into. Now, a lovely example of this, and again, extending on from the whole Cisco story there, is an organization like IBM. Now, everybody's heard of IBM as a brand, but what do they stand for? Well, traditionally, IBM has always stood for technical innovation. And so the way that they create their product portfolios is by putting their brand at the forefront of innovation. So they're looking at R&D, they're looking at innovation, they're looking at surveying, analysing new opportunities, they're looking at new technologies, and so they develop product portfolios off the back of an innovation-led brand. So for some of us, this might be a step too far. Maybe innovation isn't something that we have the deep resources to be able to do, but it's an opportunity for some organizations to maybe just pivot slightly, and particularly in these really challenging times when maybe our current product portfolios are beginning to become very, very rapidly less relevant to the world around us. So somebody like IBM is obviously very, very well positioned because they can pivot at a moment's notice and start to work in new opportunities and new innovations because that is core to their brand. So the use of innovation, the use of research, the use of development, the use of kind of creative thought in terms of what you offer to the customer and what you offer to your marketplace can be an inherent part of a successful brand. So an opportunity for us all, I guess, to learn from that particular example. And then the next bit of the journey would be very much, okay, we've figured out what appropriate products within our brand are. Well, the next thing that often sort of marketers would be thinking about is, okay, well, how am I going to appropriately price my new products or my new sort of portfolio? Well, obviously pricing strategy is, again, something that we would put hand in hand with our brand and with our branding. There's obviously a whole range of different pricing strategies that we can take, and certainly pricing itself is such a big topic. We're not going to go into it in huge detail here, but just to say that pricing can be a very, very closely aligned topic with your brand. I mean, a lovely example, one of the legendary examples when it comes to brand is the brand Stella Artois, which, you only have to search on Google Stella Artois pricing policies or pricing examples, and you'll see back the, well, probably one of the most well-known sort of advertising campaigns ever that used pricing as a core part of the brand, which was reassuringly expensive. In other words, they took the brand to mean that Stella Artois was, yes, positioned it as a premium product, but with a premium price associated with it. So it used pricing at a both strategic but also a tactical level as part of those core brand values around it. So yes, you had to pay more, but as we can see, from more recent campaigns, that perfection has its price. In other words, if you want a higher value product, you need to pay for it. So for lots of marketers, actually the whole Stella Artois sort of use of pricing as part of its brand portfolio has been a really, really helpful thing for all of us, because it's introduced the concept of pricing within brand so that we can help our customers to understand the value of our products by the price points and the price positioning that we take. So if we're always doing discount pricing, if we're always offering special offers, then that in itself puts our brand in a certain position in the marketplace. But if we want to grow our revenues, if we want to grow our profitability, we can also use then pricing tactically and strategically in our brand to say, yeah, with our brand, you do need to pay more, but the reason you're paying more are for these values to you. These things are going to be returned. So you're going to get better value from the money that you're spending with us. But if you want to save money, that's great. Go to one of our competitors, because that's not the world that we're in. So it's not saying that you have to put the price up. It's not saying that you have to discount. What it's saying is that pricing, again, is an inherent part of the way that you convey your brand, the storytelling that you do, the tone of voice, the kind of strap lines and messages, the marketing communications, and actually the way that you talk as individuals about your brand. Pricing, again, really important in there. Another part of the marketing mix, which again is so critical, is actually how you package your product or service. Now, obviously, some of the more kind of obvious examples are the ones where there is a tangible, product that you can actually put into a package. But this also applies to service industries where, you are packaging in the virtual sense your service up. And we need to think about what's appropriate. A lot of talk now about sustainable packaging and using recycled packaging and using packaging that is in very much a circular loop. So maybe the kind of packaging that you're looking to do as part of your brand story is that we take back the old packaging from our product, from our customer, and that is actually part of the process of actually providing the product or service to our customer. In other words, we take it back from them to recycle on their behalf. This kind of circular product delivery idea that's now becoming really attractive in a lot of markets. It may well be that you want to take on the real high-end packaging approach and strategically use packaging as a key element of your brand. I mean, we all know that market-leading products come out of the Apple stable. But also, in terms of the packaging, there is no doubt whatsoever that we pay more for Apple products because of the quality of the packaging. Obviously, the products themselves are premium products, and we do have to pay a premium price for those. But the packaging itself doesn't come for free. So that whole packaging experience that you get as you open your iPhone case or as you open your new MacBook Air box, we're paying for that. And so the whole experience is wrapped up into that packaging experience that we have. So another question, how do you or how could you use packaging as part of your brand story? It's really important to be using each and every one of these elements to a greater or lesser extent to appropriately position the offer that you have. And when we go to in-store, certainly if we're on the high street, this will become very, very evident very quickly that the brand experience that we give is obviously a crucial part of the whole end-to-end customer journey. But this can also apply to any organization that has physical premises or a physical experience. So if you have customers coming to your offices, if you have something that's physical in the real world, you can translate the whole concept of in-store brand experience to your own example. And it's so, so important, again, coming back to this whole thing about integrating your customer journey up together so that you can see that there's a consistency of brand experience right the way through the journey. It starts obviously at that initial point of impact and the awareness stage, goes through the whole kind of conversion process, and then into supporting customers ongoing in that retention phase. Those three stages: awareness, conversion, retention. The whole in-store experience, or whatever's relevant for you in your marketplace, is obviously crucial, really, really crucial to the whole joining up and this consistency of branding that we've been talking about. And when we talk about in-house, not in-house rather, but in-store experience, we then need to start to think about not only the physical offer that we have, but also the people and how our people are actually delivering our brand. When we come to think of certain brands where people are really associated with them, and there's a certain style of person, there's a certain behavior of person that you expect as part of that brand experience, we need to start thinking about how do our people come across in the experience that we give as part of our brand to our customers. Now, when you think of certain people employed by certain companies or certain brands, you probably already have a certain mental picture. If you think of Google people, what does that conjure up in your mind? There's a certain style and a certain behavior that you would think of as people who work for the Google brand. Certainly, using the Apple example again, you go into an Apple store, there's a certain behavior that you expect. There's a certain look and feel of that person. So they are very much the brand custodians. They're very much the brand sort of owners, if you like, down to an individual level. These brands empower their people to share those brand qualities and those brand behaviors through everything that they do, act, and say. So think about how you're using your people to convey those brand qualities that you've decided are the most important, because your people and how they operate, how they behave, is going to be a really, really important part of how your brand is successful going into the future. And of course, that's not only the external facing view of your people, it's also about the whole workplace experience. How does your brand reflect the behaviours you want your people and staff to be conveying externally? And how does your workplace experience, and this could be remotely, but it also could be a warehouse, a factory, an office, an education place, whatever your organisation is, just think about how does your workplace experience, the experience that you actually have, how does that convey how you look and want to behave and feel to the outside world? Are those things joined up? If they're not, is there an opportunity to do that? Because unless the people in your organization are behaving and feeling as part of the brand, unless the experience you're giving to them and the way that you're communicating with them is on brand, it's very, very likely that those things won't be joined up, and there will start to be gaps and maybe some gaping holes in that overall brand experience that is experienced by the customer. So this is about an end-to-end process. This is about thinking about brand in a whole variety of different ways so that you get that real consistency. We're not here saying one way is right or one way is wrong, or that everybody has to ride around on Google-style bikes and go down sort of slides and be playing on pool tables or table tennis or sitting around on beanbags, the whole kind of Google, Facebook, sort of Apple way. We're not saying that's right or wrong. What we're saying is that there needs to be a consistency of the experience that you give to your employees and to your staff. And that consistency then is far, far more able then to ripple out into the real world to give that consistent view. And of course, that brings about this whole idea of culture. One of the most meaningful things that you can do as part of your internal communications is to be foretelling and then telling the story of a really consistent brand story that relays itself and replays itself within your organization as part of the culture. Now, if you use, say, somebody like Facebook as a really, really good example here, they have such a consistent view of their internal world and their external world. Their external world is very much about bringing the world together and close together, and they talk about this one connection at a time. So in other words, building your Facebook platform, building your Facebook following, literally by connection, but they also then replay this back internally. The way they create their networks, the way they employ new staff, the way they induct those staff is all about connection and connectivity. So there's a lovely consistency there over how they project themselves externally, how the products and services operate, how they then look after their staff, and how they communicate internally as well. So that joined upness, if there is such a word, brings about a really consistent culture. Again, we're not saying you all have to do it in this same way. I'm not saying I have to do it for my business in this way, but it's about consistency. It's about using the brand to figure out, how do we do this in an appropriate way for our organization, for our people, and for our customers? And so what we're talking about here is consistency of message, consistency of brand. And that's so, so important. And it also then plays further upstream into the management style. Again, no matter what kind of style you have, and there are some really interesting management styles out there, you only have to look at the whole kind of spectrum of management. We know that there are organizations who are very inclusive, very, very kind of flat structures that are very inclusive and very kind of bonding almost as a family. And then there are very controversial management styles. One I particularly like is Michael O'Leary at Ryanair, his management style and the way he projects the whole brand. Again, this comes into the public domain. You know, he's very, very outspoken in terms of the industry, and you can see how something like the whole kind of Ryanair management style ripples down through the company culture and then onward into the way that products and services are both created but also communicated. You know, if you look at Ryanair products and services, they're very, very different to the rest of the industry. And this allows that organization to really be controversial and to really position itself as almost the maverick in the industry. So for that organization and that brand, that works very, very nicely. Again, we're not here to judge. We're just here to say there is difference and there are opportunities to learn from these different styles. For us individually, it's all about balancing management style with culture, with tone of voice, with expectations of stakeholders, with a consistent identity, and joining all of these things up in a really, really positive way, all the way through the customer journey. And this is why it's so important to keep coming back to our customer journey. Branding is only as good as the way that we convey those feelings through the customer journey, from initial awareness all the way through to becoming lifelong advocates. Our customers have to feel that this branding is joined up. And that is often a really, really clear measure and a really key measure, a real key performance indicator of how well we're performing as an organization, but also as marketers within it, is how well and how consistent our branding is reflected across the customer journey. There's a lovely example which I've just recently signed up to, which is Ecotricity, the green energy provider. And I've just literally moved over to them. I'm not here necessarily to advocate them, but I just have to say that the experience I've had of late has been really, really good. It's very, very customer centric. They talk in a very consistent language. It's very, very approachable. It's first name terms. There's no Mr. Wilkins. It's all, hi Neil, how's things going? We'd like a meter reading. How's the meter going? Blah, blah, blah. It's all of these lovely things in a really, really sort of consistent, genuine and authentic style. And this comes right the way through from the chief exec all the way to the person on the customer service help desk if you have an issue. So there's a lovely consistency of journey here. No matter where you see the Ecotricity brand, it's always on brand. Whether you sign up to this, whether you like this or whether you don't, the key message is about consistency through the journey. And so for me, that's just a lovely example. They claim awesome customer service. I've got to say, so far so good. So what can we do with a lot of these building blocks? Well, to me, one of the things that we can do with these building blocks is kind of use them to rate both how we're doing. Maybe we put a numeric score, maybe 1 to 10, on how we think we're using each of these brand elements to good effect, or where there's room for opportunity. Maybe if we score each of these elements from 1, and they're really, really not doing well, or we've not looked at it, through to 10, we are world class. And then maybe we look at maybe a competitor or two and kind of just look at the differences. Maybe we look at things like their marketing communication and tone of voice. How are they doing versus how we're doing? Who would be the leader within our sector? So that we get a maybe slightly different perspective and different view of our market sector. If you go through each of these elements and just look at it from a branding perspective, not judging as who the leader is, but just looking for good and weaker practice, then we get a really nice kind of consistent branding view over our sector. And then, of course, what we can do is we can just use this as our brand checklist. We can go and talk to others in the organization. We can look at things like our visual identity, look for opportunities for improvement. For me, it is all about the alignment of consistency. I come back to this point about customer journey and how consistently we use brand in our organization. How we can use it not only from an external perspective, but also how we talk internally about the brand, about our products and services, and about the value that we're bringing to others in our organization, as well as those who are sort of sitting outside of the organization. And it's that joining up and integration, which to me is really, really key, really, really important. So that's it. I think there are sort of a whole range of different things that we can sort of take away from this, and it's a really great exercise to go through. So if over the coming weeks and months you have an opportunity to work through your brand checklist and just be honest and open and authentic with yourself, be really, sort of true to critiquing how you're doing on each of these things. Think about consistency, think about the customer journey, think about across the organization, do you do this consistently? And I think there's also an awful lot you can learn about how you're performing, not just from a revenue and product sales or sort of social marketing perspective, but think about how you're doing in terms of the consistency for the future of this long-term branding. I've been sort of noticing there's been a few questions which have come through, and as I've been going through this, so I'd just like to sort of answer 2 or 3 of these. So one question that came through is branding more important in B2C? So B2C being business to consumer. I'd say that's probably not more important. I'd say it's probably seen more. I think people in business to consumer, so that is consumer brands, I think probably we see more examples. If you go and search on, give me some good examples of branding, almost certainly we see more examples of B2C than we do B2B, business to business. Although hopefully, as I've been sort of talking through here, I've tried to sort of balance consumer and business brands in pretty much equal measure. I think branding is as important in B2C, in B2B as it is B2C. And the reason I say that is because I think if it is that feeling that you're looking to impart, again, when all products and services and everything else is taken away, what we're looking for in B2B are long-term strategic relationships. So we're only going to get those if people see beyond the immediate product or service and see the value in the longer term. Now, of course, in B2B, we want those kinds of relationships. So I'd say it's probably at least as important, if not more, than in B2C. It's about figuring out from that checklist that I talked about, is figuring out kind of where you sit right now and what you can sort of work on. And it's also about, I guess, kind of asking your partners and your stakeholders, what is it that they expect? What is it that they would value? And then checking and doing almost a sort of a check and balance as to how you're performing against those expectations, and then maybe reinventing or retuning or retweaking your brand appropriately. I think that would be a really good starting point. So it's a bit of an internal exercise, but don't lose sight of the fact you can actually ask some trusted friendlies for their guidance and advice and get some feedback from them as well. Next question I've got here is, which element is the most important? Well, that's a really hard one. I guess the answer probably is, well, whichever one is most important for you as a business. And I've given, I think it's about a dozen on this list. I didn't really count as I went through it, but I think it's probably about 12. Um, I'd say probably the ones that are most clearly associated with people. I think a brand only exists in the eyes of people. A brand doesn't exist in isolation away from people. And as if we're using this definition of it's how it makes people feel, then you can't do that without people. So I think any elements that use or consider people are probably the most important ones. And that leads on to the very next question I got, which is how do I get everyone on brand? And that's actually links in beautifully with that previous question, because for me, the way that you get everyone on brand is just really clear internal communications. So that is about consistent and ongoing training of everybody. It's about making sure that the people you recruit understand the brand, understand the values and the core purpose. It's about inducting them in the right way so that they just literally from day one understand this is what the brand stands for. This is why we're here. This is why we're in business, or here's why we're an organization. The rest of it is just detail. I think if people can understand that this is the reason why you are part of this organization, and consistently reminding and training and upskilling and developing their skills around that, I think that's the key thing. That's how you get everyone on brand. So clear internal communications, both face to face, if you can be doing that through your intranet or through video calls or through team meetings. Of course, at the moment it's going to have to be virtually, but into the future it's going to be back to sort of face-to-face stuff. I think just clear, consistent internal communications is how you do that. There's no way you can have a consistent brand if people aren't briefed and if people aren't encouraged and possibly rewarded to be on brand. I think if you can do that, that's the way to do it. I think just putting a nice new fresh new brand out there with just nice logo and lovely color palette and expecting everyone to jump on board and buy into it, I think, that's it's probably a little bit too much to ask for. But still, a lot of organizations try that. They get very excited about how their brand looks rather than actually how their brand sort of plays out in the real world. So use your people strategically and tactically. The only way you can do that is clear internal comms. And so I think, just consistently remind people and get great case studies and examples of where your staff and your management have actually used brand in a really great way to provide really great value. And I think the more you can storytell around those real clear case studies, that's the kind of thing that people then can replicate and they can actually work with themselves. So don't talk at a conceptual level about brand, talk at a really practical level. I think that's really, really important. Another question here is, how can I use branding to develop new products? Well, I think we talked a little bit about that in terms of it being about maybe sort of careful research. I don't think that ever sort of comes, outside of the whole kind of new product development piece. I think if you are looking to create new products and services, and particularly at the moment, if you're looking to maybe pivot because products and services that you've offered to this point are no longer available because we're moving into what looks like a very different world now for the coming months. And I think, organizations who are able to use brand and use and really understand what their brand is, to maybe go off at a tangent, really pivot and offer extra value. We're seeing, just as an example, we're seeing hotels kind of sort of reinventing themselves and saying, hey, look, we're workspaces actually as much as we are hotels. I saw an example at the weekend of a hotel that's kind of opening itself up as a remote working space for people who are not able to work at home for whatever reason. Hotel rooms now being opened up as little mini offices where you get one person per hotel room. So little ways of kind of pivoting the traditional offer that they had and using their brand. And of course, that adds huge amounts of credibility to the brand values because it is value. So I think that's how people can use brand to develop new products, new offering, new services, is to think about what is the value of our brand? How do people view us? How do people see the value that we bring? And can we pivot on that and become very innovative? Maybe it's a few little steps, or maybe it's some huge number of steps that is now possible because we've got this brand position. So really get to understand your brand and see really what you can do with it. So for me, that's probably the best way of how you can use brand to develop new products, is listen to your stakeholders, get really where they sort of see your brand, and start to be creative. Do lots of whiteboarding, come up with some great ideas of adding value. Now has never been a better time to add great value. So if your brand allows you to do that, or if you're being forced into having to do that, take the opportunity, do it here today. Yeah, there's no reason why not. So thanks for those questions. Those have been really, really good, actually, and allowed us just to go a little bit deeper onto some of those points. I hope you found this an interesting and hopefully slightly different view of branding. But remember, it is about the feelings that you're conveying and leaving with your customers. Think about the whole journey that you give to your customers and how you can or do use your brand to provide really, really strong value. And if there's one word that I'd hope I can leave you sort of with, it's about consistency. I think the more consistency you can put in the brand and how your brand is seen and experienced across all of the different channels, all of the different platforms, the more consistency of your brand that can be experienced externally and also internally by your staff, the better. So that's the one word I'd like you to kind of remember sort of from this webinar. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be doing obviously lots more webinars, so keep in touch. And if you do have any sort of questions after this particular sort of session, or if you're watching this on catch up, use the message thread facility below the box where you're watching this, and do ask any questions, and I'll endeavour to answer that if you have any sort of brand or branding questions after you've experienced and maybe even just reflected on this or tried it. If you find some really, really good examples of how you've put branding into practice in your organisation, it'd be great to share that. So, so do let me know. Thanks ever so much for listening, and I will see you again on another webinar very, very soon.